Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. Today we will be hopping into 1819 to tell some stories of exploration, innovation, and a debate that divides Congress. There's a lot to get into, so let's get started. Welcome to 1819 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America. A country with, especially lately, a lot to be thankful for. To most Americans, prosperity seems permanent, but beneath the surface, financial pressures are building, and this year will bring the nation's first great economic crash. In these years after the War of 1812, trade resumed across the Atlantic and demand for American cotton exploded in Europe. Its high price convinced planters and speculators that land in the South and West would yield endless profits, so borrowing surged and the Second Bank of the United States encouraged the boom by lending heavily and permitting its state branches to issue vast amounts of banknotes. Local banks followed suit and would even often lend beyond their reserves. Beginning last year, however, cotton prices fell sharply as European markets recovered and demand eased. The Bank of the United States, alarmed at its own overextension, abruptly tightened credit and called in its loans as we mentioned last year. Paper money floods back to the banks for redemption in hard coin, but reserves are thin. So now, in the opening months of 1819, credit collapses. Merchants cannot pay their debts, farmers cannot sell their crops at their former prices, and are thus in a harder position to pay back their loans. This means that land plummets in value. Across the nation, businesses close their doors, farmers lose their land to foreclosure, and unemployment spreads in eastern cities, while in the West, ruined settlers abandon homesteads that they can no longer hold. Let's look at this in terms of numbers. In New York State, property values reportedly fall from $315 million to $256 million in just 2 years. In Richmond, property values are halved. In Pennsylvania, land values plunged from $150 an acre in 1815 to just $35 this year. Major cities are feeling the pressure as in Philadelphia, over 1,800 individuals are committed to debtor's prison, and in Boston, that figure is said to be 3,500. In New York this year, the Society for the Prevention of Pauperism counts 8,000 paupers out of a population of 120,000, a figure which only grows into next year. This financial downturn also spins out a court case with some pretty big implications, as in certain states, anti-bank sentiment is already rampant. Indiana, Illinois, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, Kentucky, Ohio, and Maryland have adopted laws designed to curtail or prohibit the operation of the Bank of the United States. John James, an agent of the state of Maryland, called on James McCulloch, the cashier of the Baltimore branch of the bank, and he demands that McCulloch comply with the state law passed last year, which requires all banks chartered outside Maryland to pay a tax of $100 on all notes issued, or, alternatively, to pay an annual sum of $15,000 to the state. McCulloch refuses to comply with the state and he is prosecuted. He loses in Maryland courts, so in September of last year his case is appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And we'll touch more on this case and the financial panic throughout the episode, but for now, at least that lays the groundwork of the economic environment these United States find themselves in. The end of January brings some developments in education, as on January 25th, the General Assembly formally approves Central College in Charlottesville as the site for the University of Virginia, an institution founded by Thomas Jefferson, which will go on to become Virginia's first truly public university. Just 5 days later, the Literary Society of Romney is founded in Western Virginia by prominent citizens with the stated goal of advancing literature and science and promoting self-improvement through discussion. Now, one of two famous cases decided by the Supreme Court finds us here, on February 2nd, as John Marshall issues a ruling in the case of Dartmouth College versus Woodward, allowing Dartmouth to keep its charter and remain a private institution. The case is brought because the New Hampshire legislature attempted to forcefully change Dartmouth College into a state university by transforming the control of trustee appointments to the governor. This question before the court being whether or not New Hampshire's legislature unconstitutionally interfered with the college's rights under the contract clause. In a 5-1 decision, the court concludes that the contract clause applies to private as well as public corporations. The court holds that the college's corporate charter qualifies as a contract between private parties with which the legislature can not interfere. Now, on February 15th, Representative James Talmadge Jr. of New York proposes an amendment to prohibit slavery in Missouri. His proposal would allow for the gradual emancipation of slaves in the territory, and when the bill is sent to the Senate, Rufus King, the anti-slavery Federalist we've mentioned a few times already, supports Talmadge's amendment in what proves to be an uphill battle there. King makes the case that the power of Congress, including the right to regulate the conditions of new states, includes the restriction of slavery. His fear is that if the power to create the laws of a new state were left to slaveholders, slavery as an institution would never fade away. He cites the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which prohibited slavery in what would eventually become the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and which every southern state approved. Congress may therefore make it a condition of the admission of a new state that slavery shall be forever prohibited within the same, he said. Most disturbing for the unity of the country is that debaters are divided along sectional lines, not party lines, with only a very few exceptions. Northerners tend to support Talmadge's amendment regardless of party affiliation, and Southerners oppose it, despite having party differences on other matters. Before its passing the House, there's an interesting debate that I'll recount briefly here, though the entire transcript of this back and forth is much, much longer, and I do encourage you to read it if you are interested. On the floor of the House, Representative Thomas Cobb of Georgia looks at Talmadge dead in the eye when he says, "You have kindled a fire which all the waters in the ocean cannot put out, which seas of blood can only extinguish." Talmadge replies, "Sir, the honorable gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Scott, who has just resumed his seat, has told us of the ideas of March, and has cautioned us to beware the fate of Caesar and of Rome. Another gentleman, Mr. Cobb from Georgia, in addition to other expressions of great warmth, has said that if we persist, the Union will be dissolved, and, with a look fixed on me, has told us, we have kindled a fire which all the waters of the ocean cannot put out, which seas of blood can only extinguish. Sir, if a dissolution of the Union must take place, let it be so. If civil war, which gentlemen so much threaten must come, I can only say, let it come. My hold on life is probably as frail as that of any man who now hears me, but while that hold lasts, it shall be devoted to the service of my country, to the freedom of man. If blood is necessary to extinguish any fire which I have assisted to kindle, I can assure, gentlemen, while I regret the necessity, I shall not forbear to contribute my mite. Sir, the violence to which gentlemen have resorted on this subject will not move my purpose, nor drive me from my place. I have the fortune and the honor to stand here as the representative of free men, who possess intelligence to know their rights, who have the spirit to maintain them. Whatever might be my own private sentiments on the subject, standing here as the representative of others, no choice is left me. I know the will of my constituents, and regardless of consequence, I will avow it as their representative. I will proclaim their hatred to slavery in every shape as their representative. Here will I hold my stand until this floor, with the Constitution of my country which supports it, shall sink beneath me. If I am doomed to fail, I shall at least have the painful consolation to believe that I fall as a fragment in the ruins of my country. The bill now before us proves the correctness of my argument. It is filled with conditions and limitations, and to all these amendments we have heard no objection. They have passed unanimously. But now, when an amendment prohibiting the further introduction of slavery is proposed, the whole House is put in agitation, and we are confidently told that it is unconstitutional to annex conditions on the admission of a new state into the Union. The result of all this is that all amendments and conditions are proper, which suit a certain class of gentlemen, but whatever amendment is proposed which does not comport with their interests or views is unconstitutional and a flagrant violation of this sacred charter of our rights. In order to be consistent, gentlemen must go back and strike out the various amendments to which they have already agreed. The Constitution applies equally to all or to none. As an evil brought upon us without our own fault before the formation of our government, and as one of the sins of that nation from which we have revolted, we must of necessity legislate upon this subject. As I said, the amendment narrowly passes the House. However, in the Senate, Southerners maintain greater influence and are able to block the passage of the amendment. When Congress takes their annual recess, the entire statehood bill regarding Missouri lapses. On the 22nd of February, the long-disputed future of Florida is being decided. After years of tension, negotiation, and conflict, Spain formally cedes East and West Florida to the United States in this newly signed Adams-Onís Treaty. The agreement is inked in Washington by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams and Spanish Minister Luis de Onís, ending one of the most complicated border disputes in the Republic's history thus far. For the United States, this is a win not only as its new land, but it's also a much-needed security measure, as Florida can no longer serve as a southern refuge from federal jurisdiction. Another not insignificant benefit is the over 1,000 miles of coastline. And as this is the southernmost territory of the United States, provides a unique, humid, and tropical growing environment, though it'll take years for all the benefits to be realized. For Spain, once a global superpower now being weakened, Madrid no longer has the resources to defend its far-flung territories, and Florida is a liability it can no longer afford, as Jackson's campaign helped to prove. Adams sees this as a triumph of diplomacy. For years, he has pushed the idea that America must define its continental destiny not by chance, but by careful legal agreements. He insists that the treaty is not a conquest, but is a lawful transfer. However, Spain knows it cannot retake Florida by force and therefore accepted the terms that only months earlier seemed unlikely. By unanimous Senate approval on February 24th, the treaty is ratified and the president signs the same day, making it official, at least for the U.S. Spain takes months to ratify, counter to the terms of the treaty, so the American signing has to be renewed before technically going into force, but again, the Senate passes the approval easily, and the president signs. On March 2nd, Congress passes legislation carving a new jurisdiction out of the western frontier, the Arkansas Territory. It's split from the southern portion of the Missouri Territory, This new land is designed to bring order to a rapidly growing settlement zone along the Arkansas River. Politically, the creation of the Arkansas Territory also positions the United States to manage the delicate balance between free and slave states. Slavery has already taken root in the area, with cotton cultivation beginning to spread from the neighboring Mississippi. So, by separating Arkansas from Missouri, Congress helps to prepare for Missouri's eventual statehood while accommodating settlers pushing into the southern frontier. Now, catching back up with the Supreme Court case that spun out from the financial crisis, the court hears arguments in the McCulloch v. Maryland case for 9 days, and the court's aim is to address the constitutionality and legality of the Second Bank of the United States and answer the question of whether Maryland can impose a tax on it or not. On March 6th, the Supreme Court hands down its decision only 3 days after completion of arguments, and while there is much activity in Congress focused on revoking the bank's charter, the ruling is, of course, definitive. As I try to be very precise, especially with legal matters, this portion is adopted from EBSCO. The opinion of Chief Justice John Marshall is regarded by most scholars as his most important pronouncement in constitutional law and the one most important to the future of the United States. The Constitution, says Marshall, establishes a truly national government that is emphatically and truly a government of the people. In form and in substance, it emanates from them. Its powers are granted by them and are to be exercised directly on them and for their benefit. Much of the remainder of Marshall's opinion is an extension and application of this national theory of the Constitution's foundations. Sovereignty is divided between federal and state governments. When state power conflicts with national power, the former must yield because national sovereignty is supreme. The judiciary, Marshall writes, is constitutionally required to construe Congress' enumerated powers broadly. The Necessary and Proper Clause, sometimes called the Elastic Clause, is designed to empower Congress to exercise its delegated powers by any convenient and expedient method not prohibited by the Constitution itself. Marshall finds that the Necessary and Proper Clause gives rise to what has come to be known implied powers. McCulloch v. Maryland is the Supreme Court's earliest and most renowned implied powers case. In its ruling for the United States and against Maryland, the court upholds the constitutionality of the federal government to incorporate a national bank in Baltimore. In doing so, it accomplishes 3 important goals. It clarifies the power of state taxation and congressional authority in economic policy making, reinforces the principles of U.S. federalism, and specifies that the Necessary and Proper Clause of the Constitution grants Congress certain implied powers that extend beyond its enumerated powers. Ultimately, the Bank of the United States is constitutional. A trend that will only continue and will ever be a major focus of this show is that despite America being still a relatively new nation, at least on the global stage, many technological and scientific advancements are made that redefine what's possible, and a nice example of this comes in the form of the SS Savannah, which, as the SS denotes, is a steamship, and as the name does not imply, this ship was built in New York City. The following details about this ship, soon to set a record, come to us from the United States Naval Institute. Stephen Rogers is given charge of rigging and fitting out the steamship. She is a full-rigged sailing square rigger, 110 feet overall, except that she has no royal masts or royals on her 3 masts. There is more space than usual between her mainmast and the foremast to permit her propulsion machinery to be installed there. In addition to being in charge of this part of her fitting out, Stevens also supervises the finishing of her cabins. Designed to command the attention of the leaders of governments and society, the accommodations are as luxurious as those in any ship now afloat. The passenger space is divided into 2 berth staterooms for its 32 passengers, with rosewood and mahogany paneling and imitation marble floors, full-length mirrors, and costly tapestries. Stevens loved to tell the story of a Negro suspected of being a runaway slave who came aboard while the vessel was under construction, and when he saw another Negro in the mirror, he was terrified. When he saw a second reflection of himself in still another mirror, he fled, perhaps, as Stephen thought, believing that the ship was full of Negroes being taken south to be re-enslaved. On the 11th of May, the ship's log records that President of the United States James Monroe and suite came on board of the ship at 8 a.m., and after dining on board the luxury vessel, declared himself well pleased with the ship, suggesting that she be brought to Washington to display her values to government officials and congressmen. Cuban pirates are operating off the coast of Florida, and the president thinks that her ability to navigate with utter disregard to the amount of favorable wind might make her of great value in capturing them. The newspaper, Gregorian, from Wednesday, May 19th, states that the steamship Savannah, Captain Rogers, will, without fail, proceed direct to Liverpool tomorrow, 20th instant. Passengers, if any offer, can be well accommodated, though the departure is delayed, and on May 22nd, the log states that at 7 a.m. got steam up, winded ship, and hove up the anchor, and at 9 a.m. started with the steam from Savannah. The next time that the world hears of the SS Savannah is after her sailing is printed again in the Gregorian, which reports a false alarm caused by the smoke of the steam engine, causing a nearby ship to think the ship is on fire. Captain Livingston of the schooner Contract, who arrived at Newburyport on the 5th instant, says the Gregorian, sighted on the 29th of May a vessel ahead to eastward, from which he saw volumes of smoke issuing. Judging it to be a vessel on fire, stood for her in order to afford relief, but, observes Captain Livingston, found she went faster with fire and smoke than we possibly could with all sail set. It was then discovered that what we supposed a vessel on fire was nothing less than a steamboat crossing the Western Ocean, laying her course, as we judge, for Europe. A proud moment of Yankee skill and enterprise. Success to her. On the 2nd of June, it's recorded by Pluto, clear weather, smooth sea, latitude 42 degrees, longitude 50 degrees, spoke and passed the elegant steamship 8 days out from Savannah to Petersburg by way of Liverpool. She passed us at the rate of 9 or 10 knots, and the captain informed us she worked remarkably well, and the greatest compliment we could bestow was to give her 3 cheers as the happiest effort of mechanical genius that ever appeared on the Western Ocean. The mechanical genius of this coal-powered steamship is again mistaken as a ship in distress, as recorded in the London Times, which states that Savannah, a steam vessel recently arrived at Liverpool from America, the first vessel of the kind which ever crossed the Atlantic, was chased the whole day off the coast of Ireland by the Kite, revenue cruiser, on the Cork station, which mistook her for a ship on fire. This marks the first time a steamship has made the voyage across the Atlantic, and although nobody besides the crew of the ship is brave enough to travel on this first crossing, she'll prove to be one of the safest ships of her time. In another steamboat journey, though this one in the interior, Colonel Henry Atkinson and Major Stephen Long set out on a journey aimed at, quote, the protection of our northwestern frontier and the greater extension of our fur trade. They set out from St. Louis with 1,126 riflemen on 3 state-of-the-art steamboats designed for shallow water, though eventually the travel proves too difficult by steam power, and this Yellowstone expedition, as it comes to be known, resorts to using the same rowing, poling, and towing that Lewis and Clark had used to head upriver 15 years ago. That's not the end of the expedition's hardships, however, as the large party actually complicates and slows travel, causes the entire mission to run greatly over budget, and the economic downturn causes Congress to withdraw funding from the expedition. Some 85 years later, the event is recorded as, quote, an unqualified failure, if not a huge fiasco. Now, another bold journey is taking place on the far edge of Spanish America. Dr. James Long, a former U.S. Army surgeon and frontier adventurer, is leading a band of 195 men into the piney woods of East Texas. They occupy Nacogdoches, a small Spanish settlement long contested between empires, and declare the formation of a new government. Dr. Long proclaims himself president, and his assertion of power is backed by a 21-member Supreme Council, which establishes what Long calls the Republic of Texas. It's not random that Long takes up this unofficial occupation of Spanish land. As part of the treaty that granted the U.S. the rights to Florida, the United States government agreed to relinquish any claims to Texas, but the people have a different idea, and some, like Long, begin taking matters into their own hands to secure the fertile growing lands offered in the vast southwestern land of North America. Amongst Long's most ardent supporters are his wife's uncle, a man who's been involved before in a plot to start a new government outside of the control of Spain and America, though that's gone unknown to the public, General James Wilkerson, famous, or rather infamous, for the Burr conspiracy. Another supporter is a man who himself only recently sought to claim for America what Spain at the time claimed, though to more success: Andrew Jackson. These 3 men tend not to want to wait for official approval or even seek it, and instead just do things. So let's see how this plays out. On June 22nd, Long and his followers raise their banner in Nacogdoches, essentially an open challenge to Spanish rule, but one that is not really hard fought, as the settlement, being isolated and thinly garrisoned, falls quickly to the Americans. The Spanish officials flee, and Long sets up his provisional government, dividing authority, though unequally, between himself and the council. Long, a civilian turned pioneering statesman, is now the head of an independent nation, and on the 23rd his council issues a Declaration of Independence for the Republic of Texas, modeled deliberately on the American Declaration from '76, and I've opted to read it here. Declaration by the Supreme Council of the Province of Texas. As all governments were originally established by the will of the people for the benefit of society, whenever the existing government in any community fails to effect the purposes for which it was instituted, it is competent to the community at large to rescind its express or tacit allegiance to the ruling power, and to organize a new constitution and form of government more consistent with its interests and more consonant with its feelings. In exercising this unquestionable right, an independent people have only to consult their own discretion. But, though amenable to no tribunal for its municipal acts, a free state, in claiming admission to the immunity of nations, owes itself an exposition of the motives which have prompted it to the assertion of its rights, as well as of the principles which it assumes to vindicate. The citizens of Texas have long indulged the hope that in the adjustment of the boundaries of the Spanish possessions in America and of the territories of the United States, that they should be included within the limits of the latter. The claims of the United States, long and strenuously urged, encouraged the hope. An expectation so flattering prevented any effectual effort to throw off the yoke of Spanish authority, though it could not restrain some ineffectual rebellions against an odious tyranny. The recent treaty between Spain and the United States of America has dissipated an illusion too long fondly cherished, and has roused the citizens of Texas from the torpor to which a fancied security had lulled them. They have seen themselves, by a convention to which they were no party, literally abandoned to the dominion of the Crown of Spain, and left a prey not only to impositions already intolerable, but to all those exactions which Spanish rapacity is fertile in devising. The citizens of Texas would have proved themselves unworthy of the age in which they live, unworthy of their ancestry, of the kindred of the republics of the American continent, could they have hesitated in this emergency what course to pursue. Spurning the fetters of colonial vassalage, disdaining to submit to the most atrocious despotism that ever disgraced the annals of Europe, they have resolved under the blessing of God to be free. By this magnanimous resolution, the maintenance of which their lives and fortunes are pledged, they secure to themselves in elective and representative government equal laws and the faithful administration of justice, the rights of conscience and religious liberty, the freedom of the press, the advantage of liberal education, and unrestricted commercial intercourse with all the world. Animated by a just confidence in the goodness of their cause, and stimulated by the high object to be obtained by the contest, they have prepared themselves unshrinkingly to meet and firmly to sustain any conflict in which this declaration may involve them. Done at Nacogdoches, the 23rd day of June, in the year of our Lord 1819. James Long, President of the Supreme Council. There are some neat depictions of the flag flown over Nacogdoches, and the completely red and white flag has 13 stripes and a lone star in its red canton. This obviously being a precursor to the current flag of Texas, though we won't see that adopted for about 20 years. In contrast to this unsanctioned filibustering of Spanish land, on the 4th of July, an official act makes the Arkansas Territory effective. It's carved out of the territory of Missouri due to Missouri's petitioning for statehood, though, as I mentioned, that's being disputed, and this territory includes what will become Oklahoma. Nearing the end of the year, on November 3rd, the USS Congress, commanded by Captain John D. Henley, becomes the first United States warship to visit China, landing at Linton Island off the coast of Canton. When Congress reconvenes as the 16th Congress here in December, congressmen reignite debates over Missouri's statehood. It at first seems like it will be a continued deadlock, but President James Monroe, Speaker of the House Henry Clay, and key Senate Democratic Republicans work behind the scenes on a compromise to solve this crisis, which we'll cover next year. Less controversially, however, on December 14th, Alabama is admitted as the 22nd U.S. state, and William Bibb is sworn in as the first governor of Alabama, replacing himself as the only governor of the Alabama Territory. With that, I'm all out of stuff to talk about from 1819, but I hope you've enjoyed the episode and learned something here or there along the way. Get in contact and let me know if there was some information that was news to you. We'll be coming back tomorrow with 1820 before the weekend, and I look forward to covering that as well. Make sure you subscribe to the show or follow it wherever you are listening to this to stay in the know. But until next time, this has been Our Story, 250 years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.